Okay, great. So so thanks everyone for joining us. So I'm Marika Holland. I'm a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and I'm joined by Jennifer Kay from the University of Colorado. So she's here in the room with me, and also Twyla Moon from the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And you probably could all see Twyla. She's in a different location, but we're going to be sharing this presentation. So at some point, we'll be swapping speakers, and actually I'll stop sharing my screen and Twyla will start sharing hers. So hopefully that all goes smoothly. So we're going to give you an update on an Arctic System Change workshop that was held in April. And the motivation for this workshop, and I don't think this is an audience that needs to be told this in too much detail, but of course, change is occurring across the Arctic system. It's pervasive, it's rapid, and a lot of these changes occurring in the system are coupled and interacting. So some examples here, you can see the September ice concentration trends over the satellite era, extreme sea ice loss that's been occurring. Those are accompanied by warming of the surface ocean. We have evidence of that from observations. There's also extreme Greenland melt years that have occurred. We're seeing landscape change associated with the thawing of permafrost, changes in the hydrologic cycle associated with that. And we're also seeing extreme events and things like surface air temperature anomalies. And in this particular example on the lower right panel, air temperatures in the winter Arctic that were above the freezing temperature. And those kinds of things are making headlines, of course. So these changes are occurring across the system. And in order to better understand them and predict them, we really need to understand that system component and really take a system perspective. And I think this schematic that was from a report put together by Andrew Roberts sort of illustrates the complexity of trying to do this. And there's many different components interacting. There's different time scales, there's different spatial scales. And so to really advance the science, we need to take insights from scientists with different domain expertise, different disciplines, different perspectives, and try to bring that all together. And that includes understanding how these different Earth system components interact, how they function in themselves, what the coupling is across the components, what the climate feedbacks are that occur because of that coupling, how that can enhance or dampen changes occurring in the system. And of course, we also want to understand how the Arctic fits within the global system. It's not separated from the globe. It's being impacted by the globe. And of course, the most obvious indication of this is rising greenhouse gases, which are largely due to human activity outside of the Arctic, are one of the main drivers of Arctic change. But of course, the Arctic change also impacts the global system. It enhances the warming of the system. Things like land ice melting affect sea level rise. So we want to really understand those interactions and also understand the interactions between the physical, the biological, the chemical aspects of change. So this is complicated. And in order to do this well, it really requires us to more effectively integrate the kinds of discoveries that are being made using observations, using models, using theory. And that's also a complicated and a challenging thing to do. And in this context, we mean this very broadly. So in terms of observations, it includes remote sensing observations, it includes in situ measurements, individual field campaigns, autonomous measurements, and also things like paleoclimate proxies to give us some indication of analogs in the past that might inform us on present conditions and changes occurring in the Arctic. Integrating those with models, we also mean this very broadly. So including process models, component models of individual aspects of the Earth system, and also fully coupled Earth system models, which have biogeochemistry, active carbon cycles, and basically the many major elements of the climate system that are interacting. So this is also a challenge, how to do this and do this well and do this better than what we've been doing in the past to really make more rapid progress on understanding the very large and dramatic changes that are underway. So that was basically the motivation for this workshop. And the workshop itself was really to explore this system-wide perspective on how the Arctic is changing, why it's changing, and where it's headed. And the workshop was held in April at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. And it was funded by the National Science Foundation through the Arctic System program at NSF. So this particular workshop addressed the local and remote controls of Arctic system change, the importance of coupled interactions, and one of the things that we and the steering committee that was involved in putting this workshop together identified as an important need was the fact that in trying to do this science across different disciplines and domain expertise, we really need to build a community that can do this. And so we had a lot of community building elements to try and get participants to interact and to ultimately collaborate on this science. And we'll have more information on what some of those were later in the talk. So the primary goals of the workshop were to identify the research needs, so really looking at the science itself, what's critically important to understand and advance the science, what avenues we would recommend for better integration of observing and modeling approaches to address those science themes. And in this case, we often looked to things that have been working in other aspects of Earth system science and what the Arctic science community can learn from those. And then also these better mechanisms to enhance collaboration across the Arctic science community to advance synthesis. And a lot of how we did this was some of those mechanisms we actually explored at the meeting itself in these community building activities. So with the thought that that could help us understand better what works well, what fell flat, et cetera. So the participants of the workshop, there were about 70 participants, and you can see a photograph of them all here. They're all smiling, so they were all having a good time. It included a mix of disciplines, and so our steering committee included people from atmosphere, ocean, land, sea ice, land ice, and so the participants of the workshop also reflected all of those different domain expertise areas. And we also had dedicated resources for early career scientists to participate. And those early career scientists actually applied to come to the meeting. And so were chosen by the steering committee through an application process. And if you want more information on the names of the participants and also the talks that were given and some other information, you can find that at the web link that I have listed here at the bottom of the slide. So the structure of the workshop itself was, we didn't want this to be a kind of standard science meeting where you have 20-minute talks one after the other. We really did want this to be sort of a community building activity as well. So we did have a limited number of presentations. Those presentations were very high level. They were meant to set the stage and get people in with different areas of expertise to really understand and appreciate the challenges that cut across Arctic system science, but also challenges that were particular to specific aspects of trying to understand the Arctic system. So in addition to those limited number of high-level presentations, we also had breakout groups. Those breakout groups were aimed at identifying the science questions that needed to be addressed, and also discussing mechanisms to address them, and in particular, discussing things like how to better integrate models and observations to understand these science questions. We often were coming back into plenary session to synthesize things that were being learned in the breakout groups, to synthesize things that were being learned from the presentations and discussions, and so there was kind of a check-in pretty frequently throughout the meeting to make sure we were all learning from each other. And then again, we had these community building activities. And part of this was with the recognition that some people are very comfortable speaking up in plenary sessions, some people are more comfortable speaking up in breakouts. But there's also a real value in having people interact one-on-one, to have people interact in different ways, and to really try and get everybody interacting and working together in the meeting. So we were very cognizant of that and did a lot of activities to try and facilitate that. And that, again, we'll have some information on those activities later on in the presentation. So that kind of gives you an overview of the workshop itself. So now I'm actually going to turn it over to Jen, and she's going to talk about some of the science theme outcomes that were identified. So I'll kind of scooch over and let Jen scooch up. And yeah, so take it away, Jen.
Great. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm Jen Kay. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado, and I was one of the workshop attendees. And one of the things that was really great about this workshop was the diversity of activities, as Marika mentioned. And through our sort of breakout groups, we really centered on science themes. This was kind of a bottom-up process, so we just started talking, and these themes emerged. I noticed also that on Bob's website for some of the themes that his group is IASC, right? That they also were interested in this particular science theme of extreme events. So I just want to preface this with, I think it was maybe a month earlier, there were some of these extreme warm temperatures that Marika mentioned. It was above freezing in the middle of winter. Sea ice was actually retreating as opposed to advancing in the middle of February. And so this extreme event, which is pictured here, surface air temperature anomaly in February 27, 2018, was kind of what motivated the discussion in this particular working group, breakout group. And we really thought about sort of a Green's function approach. So basically, if we hit the Arctic system with a huge hammer, like a 20, 30 degree temperature anomaly, well, how would the system respond? And would we be able to see it? Would we be able to observe it? I mean, clearly with surface air temperature, we are, but the impacts of it, one of the things that came out of that was, things like the land surface and permafrost. We don't even really have the observation networks to even know what happens. The impacts of those extreme events can be quite diverse depending on what component or on what aspect of the system. Some things are very resilient, and an extreme event like a 20 degree temperature anomaly is no problem. The next day it'll be 20 degrees colder and you're fine. But some things have memory, and some things there's irreversibility associated with that. So we had some really interesting discussions, and it kind of moved beyond sort of some of the standard conversations that I've had about this particular topic. And it was really fun because we really had a diverse group who could really chime in with a bunch of different activities. And we thought that this would actually be a really fun topic for a dedicated workshop. Like if you could have some folks do some work in advance and then come and chat about, well, what would a 20 degree temperature anomaly do to your particular science question or your particular model component? So I just go, yeah, that one works. Okay, so then this is another science theme that emerged. I wasn't in this group, so I'll speak to it as best I can. Marika, were you in this group or?
No, I mean, we talked a bit about coastal zones in our breakout groups, yeah.
So this topic came up, and I think it's another one that brings in some of the heterogeneity and cross-model and cross-component questions and challenges, because coastal zones and system boundaries are obviously places where components and systems have to interact. And there are also regions where there's a lot of change. For example, coastal erosion, changes in river flow. So these are challenging areas to represent in numerical models because often these boundaries are sharp and so they're not well resolved. And they have important impacts not only on ecosystems, but also on society. A lot of people live on the coast, a lot of people are on these transition zones. So yeah, so I thought this was a really interesting topic. They also were thinking, oh, this would make a great whole other workshop. They could spend a whole 3 or 4 days talking about it. And everyone seemed very excited with their science themes and how they came up. So that kind of bottom-up process of coming up with science themes seemed to work really well in this particular workshop. Okay, so another breakout group discussed the hydrologic cycle. I think they really liked this particular theme because it really unifies across the Arctic system. Of course, you know, snow and precipitation of, and rain have big impacts on all components of the system, and then where that rain and snow goes, you know, how does it build up as ice or percolate down into the ground? How does it change the components that are there? So again, a lot of coupled interactions, a lot of implications for ecosystems, and also discussions about global interactions too. So yeah, and there's a nice picture. Is that Don Perovich?
I think it's Don Perovich.
Yeah, so Don Perovich in a milk pond for you all. So many threads came out of all of the science themes that were identified. This concept of irreversibility and stability analysis, again, we talked a lot about that in the context of extreme events, but it could also fit into these other science themes as well. Changing seasonality, of course, the sun is going to still give us the same amount of shortwave radiation at the same time of year, but what's underneath that is changing quickly, and there's big interactions that are important to understand there with seasonality. Feedbacks and coupled system interactions, we really talked about how integrating ideas from different disciplines and putting them in the context of a numerical model really helps you understand those feedbacks and those coupled system interactions. And that was really, really interesting to think about and talk about. The rates of change at regional scales, you know, there's really dramatic changes happening in some places, and those changes are really having a big impact, mostly because of the rate of change at which they're happening. And then, of course, the global interactions. And it looks like Santa Claus fell out of his canoe. But anyways, lots of different things were discussed. We had a lot of fun with this. In addition to science threads, we also spent a lot of time talking about science tools. Because it was clear from the presentations that different communities are at different stages of integrating observations and models and have different strategies for doing so. One example that came up was this idea of a satellite simulator, which allows you to directly compare satellite observations with models. So I would say the standard thing people might do is, you know, just pick up a satellite product and compare it to a model. But the thing is that you're doing that at your own peril, because those satellite-based products, observations, are not just defined in the same way as what the model fields are representing. And they could also be at quite different scales than what the model is representing at. And so you really have to think about these processes. And I would say we're pretty advanced in that in terms of thinking about clouds and precipitation. We heard from Clara, who is an early career scientist who attended the workshop, about efforts to develop a satellite emulator to look at brightness temperatures, so you could look at snow and sea ice. So it's an example of sort of a tool in one community that's sort of propagating into another community and is helping make these better comparisons. We talked a little bit about data assimilation across components and in coupled systems. Again, widely different uses of data assimilation, and certainly there's plenty to learn from the applications in different fields. We also talked about isotope-enabled models. This is, you know, in some ways similar to the satellite simulator concept. You're embedding the information about how isotopes are interacting within the model so that you can directly compare the model's isotopes with the real world's isotopes. And it really helps you look at some of these paleoclimate proxies and really make a more apple-to-apple comparison. We also had a lot of discussion about the kind of two-way street between models and observations. So observations obviously inform models, they inform theory that underlie numerical models, but numerical models can also inform observations. They can help you tell you where the most useful bang for your buck for putting observations would be. They can help you in looking at process-based model diagnostics that help motivate, what observations would be best to compare. I mean, the nice thing about a model is you kind of have all the fields, you have all of it there, but you don't know if it's right. And so the back and forth between the two, between models and observations, is a really important and interesting intersection to be at. And I would say one of the moments in the workshop that was kind of interesting was there was a lot of discussion about people being observationalists or modelers. And I was particularly annoyed by this because I really don't think we should be calling ourselves that. I think we should be calling ourselves scientists. And we have different tools we use, obviously. But if you label yourself a modeler, that's super intimidating to someone who's never modeled anything. And if you just say, I'm a scientist and this is one of my tools, I think you're much more approachable, and it kind of, even just in the way that we talk, we can break down some of those barriers. And obviously everyone has different expertise, and that's really important. But I think, even in the dialogue, how we talk to each other, it's really important to be cognizant of when you say things, you can, put people off just by saying like, parameterization development. All that means is you're trying to simplify the equations and put them in the model in a way that you can represent the processes that are not actually resolved. So anyways, there was a lot of discussion along these lines, a lot of tools and how to bring them together, how to explain kind of what one group is doing and how that might influence another group. It was really a very exciting workshop. So now I think we're going to transition to Twyla. So I'm going to let Marika drive. But thanks so much for tuning in. And yeah, it's great to see so many familiar names on the list there. Like that's Dan McGrath. I think he's at CSU now. And Bob Hawley and Joan McGregor I knew from University of Washington way back in the day. Twyla too, but I've seen her more recently. So anyways, it's great to see you guys. Yeah.
So I think I stopped sharing, and now Twyla can take over and talk to us about challenges.
All right, thanks guys, great. Go for it, Twyla, hopefully.
Great. Let me just move this little window off. Okay, so everyone can see this, no problem?
Looks good.
Great. All right, so move my little pointer off too. I'm gonna talk about some of the other elements we found as far as identified challenges and opportunities, which of course are intricately linked as challenges become opportunities, or opportunities become challenges in some cases. But there are two challenges that really came to the surface, especially across all of these different disciplines. One of them is dealing with the heterogeneity in our different systems. It's very difficult. You get a sense across these pictures along the bottom of just how heterogeneous the Earth's surface can be, and we're all tend to be pretty aware of this in our own disciplines, but it's not always as easy to pay attention to it in other disciplines, and it can be easy if you're spending too much time looking at just one scale or another. It can be easy to forget the heterogeneity in the system at different scales too. And so there's difficulties with this as far as representing it in models, actually obtaining observations. We all know the Arctic is a difficult place for obtaining observations. And so trying to sample all the different areas and have a representation that limits bias is a real challenge for all the different fields. And this is an issue that crosses Time, it can be very difficult to have good, especially winter sampling in the Arctic. That's a big void in many fields. Across the different locations, we can think of large areas in the Arctic Ocean. That's just an amount of space that's very difficult to cover. The same can be true with many Arctic regions. And this crosses then the different models and observations and tools we're using, and even the heterogeneity in different stakeholders and their interests that might help drive and direct some of the science, whether it's national interests, political international interests, military, security, food, local people, etc. And a real sense that we need to know and be able to capture some of this heterogeneity, because it's a really important element of how these different parts of the system are feeding back, coupling together, and how they're responding. The other one, let me see, how do I get that? Oops. Is this issue of data. This is really something that I think is true across the science world right now, where we have these increasing volumes of data. You can get that center graph on the bottom is really just showing you the increase in data quantities for this Earth System Grid Federation that they hold and disseminate and really allow a lot of the model output and observation data to be held and served in one place. And you can get a sense right there how dramatically we're increasing our data quantities. And so we need computers that work quickly. We need ways to deal with these volumes, and we need ways to learn about the new tools and methods for analyzing and intercomparing them. And that often comes from the computer science world, or us as we're getting further in our career, learning from people who are younger and might have some more of these tools that they've been learning recently in classes and other academics. Another issue that comes up here and will also come up under the opportunity space in kind of a different twist is dark data. That's that data that is sitting on your shelf unpublished, or sitting on your computer and or even is published somewhere but is not in very usable formats anywhere, or it's difficult to find. And that's a real concern as we think about all the different useful data out there, and really making sure that the data that's been collected and funded is available and getting integrated so that we can help to overcome some of our problems with sampling bias and heterogeneity. And of course, this integrating our data across disciplines and having a sense of even finding that words that mean one thing in one discipline mean another in another, and finding ways to understand each other's data and how to use it. These, of course, tie into opportunity spaces, and those sit in really 3 different levels that are here. So on top, there's the making better use of existing capabilities, and that's networking, meeting people like we were able to do at this workshop, like we're able to do if you're going to AGU and sitting in different sessions that you've never been in, those sorts of things. Existing data, so including that dark data, how is it that we make that more usable and more used? And our existing hierarchy of modeling tools that range from, small process models up to Earth system models that are well coupled between different elements. So in order to take this existing capacity and improve it, we need to make this better use of these capacities. And that's where we need to be thinking about coordination, training, having elements where we're not just training within our disciplines, but we're training across these different system components, and continuing to improve our data discovery, which I do think is really we have many data archives and those sorts of things, but those can still be quite different discipline to discipline. So there's a need there. And then the third element where we're moving past our existing ones and enhancing our different capabilities. And this includes improving representation in models, improving tools and metrics, whether that be improvements in being able to move from one to another and creating community standards, tools that are coming from machine learning or other kind of computing techniques, and community integration. One of the things that we talked about in some of the outbreak groups were even that idea of having multi-agency funding opportunities where they're really specifically building interdisciplinary teams to tackle specific topics. And we liked the idea of those kinds of things happening. We were very aware, as Marika mentioned, that we would have lots of different disciplines. We had people on the terrestrial, sea ice, oceanography, atmosphere, permafrost, land ice. So we were very conscientious that we would need to find ways for even these groups to communicate across each other. And there were several things we did to do that. One of them was we wanted to have something like a poster session, but we didn't want people bringing your standard science conference poster. We thought that was too difficult for people to digest. So instead we made what we called a big idea template. And you can see that I put in the example that was my one that I created. And the idea was that you could have a declarative statement at the top, you could have a picture or diagram, you could have one plot, and then you could have not more than 70 words to make your point. And this made it easy for people to actually take in all of the content of a poster, and because everyone had to get it down to this little a bit of information, it tended to have to be pretty simple, one idea. And we found that we really liked this model, and it was very helpful for people to be able to talk to each other across disciplines and just to create kind of interaction points for main ideas. Then you've heard a couple things about our small breakout groups. Another thing we did was use sticky note brainstorms, you can see on the top right, just to make sure that everyone's voice and ideas were being heard. And then we also took all of our big idea posters down there on the bottom, printed them out, put them up on this whiteboard in kind of where they fit into this system. And then we had break time where everyone could come and interact with that board. People moved those around, they added notes, they added questions, and was just another way for people to continue to think about system connections and research connections. One of the other elements that came across as we were not only improving our communication with each other, but really thinking about improving outward communication and engagement was really a kind of grassroots at the conference discussion. And Merit Turetsky, who's on the line too, if there are questions, can speak to this. She led this group, and so there was just a participant initiative during some of our open time to have a science engagement discussion. It was very popular. The majority of participants came to it, and I think more would have, but we really kind of ran out of room space. And there was a lot of interest there in both elements where we're networking with each other so that we can help each other with engagement activities, and also an interest in initiating new activities that are related to this Arctic systems elements, and finding perhaps shared messaging or shared tools for that. And then on the long term, thinking about if there are ways that we might continue coordination and perhaps engage multiple agencies for supporting science engagement, because we did discuss that so often there's a real difficulty in science engagement because there's a limit in really funding, time, space, money for supporting it. And what's next? Well, we have this presentation, of course. Now there are activities at the Fall AGU. There's a session integrating observations and models to better understand a changing Arctic system. Of course, you still have a couple of weeks for putting in abstracts, and we would love for people to submit abstracts to that Arctic system discussion. We'll have another workshop in early 2019 that will continue this Arctic systems focus, and it is likely to focus on extremes. So as Jen mentioned and Bob earlier, that's a topic of interest across many systems, and we'll be thinking about science engagement activities. And just to show off, Jen made this beautiful word cloud of all the different items that people had put on sticky notes regarding challenges and tools and opportunities. And I think it pretty well captures what the different elements we were discussing at the workshop. So that's all I've got on this end, and I might stop sharing because I don't think we have like too many specific graphs or things like that that people are going to want to interact with, and we have some time hopefully for then some questions.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Twyla, Jen, and Marika. That was very informative, and I certainly learned quite a lot. I'm sorry I couldn't attend the workshop. Where to start? Well, I think you guys have made a very strong case for, holistically, thinking holistically about how we continue to approach Arctic system science and the rationale for doing so, and then how we're actually going to go about and do it. So I'm a couple of years out of interacting with the NSF sort of funding approach. Is part of the rationale to help redefine the Arctic system science branch of NSF? It seems like that would only be part of it because you suggest, and I think wisely, trying to make these interagency connections as well that maybe haven't existed in the past. Does that make sense as a question? How I haven't engaged as much with Arctic system science, the call, in the past, but it seems like a full-throated argument for an expansion of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say that our workshop outcomes will redefine ARCs,
Okay.
but hopefully they will inform ARCs. I mean, so that's, and I think that was the motivation for us receiving funding to put on this workshop is to kind of get a sense of what the research community thinks are really critical science needs, some approaches to tackling those science needs. And so, I don't think it's that ARCs will swing in a totally different direction, but I think that the outcomes from this workshop will inform ARCs moving forward. And hopefully, I mean, I guess our hope as organizers and participants in this workshop is that it will inform things beyond NSF ARCs as well, and inform other agencies, and inform, ideas on how to build communities, how to do research together, what kind of tools we need, kind of the general science research landscape as well.
Yeah, and I think there's clear room for that too, with those main concepts of heterogeneity as being a major challenge, and big data being one of the ways we can approach this. Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think that this workshop has already informed some early career ideas that we've had. So NSF also gave us money for a polar modeling workshop, which we're hosting in August. And in thinking about what tools we wanted our participants to engage with, the outcome from this workshop was really helpful, right? Like model hierarchies is going to be a whole day. Like we're going to have stuff about satellite simulators and data assimilation. And so I think it's also cool to inform not just, proposals, but also education and, the next generation of folks who are going to be grappling with these questions. I don't think they're going away.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we'll all figure them out by the end of our
Joe, maybe you.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the fact that some of these research themes are emerging from multiple activities, just to how important they are, and that they really need to be tackled widely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to follow on very briefly on the idea of heterogeneity, I mostly think about ice sheets, and which are often to me, they appear to everyone else very homogeneous, but it's the details that are very appealing, heterogeneous. But then all these other systems, they're too terribly heterogeneous, and maybe other people feel the same way about other systems that they're less familiar with. And so it's a good reminder. Let's see. Let me look at the participant list to see if anyone's got their hands up, since I learned about that from Tim. No one's got their hand up, but that is a thing you can do if you go to the participant list. Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to pose to Marika, Jen, and Twyla? Jack?
Yeah, I think am I still muted or unmuted?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I was just, I was traveling and I don't even know if I was aware of this workshop. I was just wanting to make an observation is that ARCS also supported another series of workshops talking about Arctic system synthesis. And I don't know if anyone's seen it, but there's a draft report from this group. They're seeking comments right now. But it's like a lot of people are coming up with the same ideas from different directions, and that's all very encouraging and really kind of exciting. But one thing that I'm a little nervous about ARCS is that ARCS seems to feel that we don't need to be observing the Arctic. We just need to be taking all the recent results that we have and modeling the heck out of it. And I was just wondering any feedback from anybody else on the call about that.
The speakers, do you want to take that one, or?
Well, I mean, I guess all I'll say is that we were very strongly encouraged to make sure we had people, I won't call us observers and modelers because Jen doesn't like that, but people using different tools to understand the Arctic. People, that are more familiar with observations, people that are more familiar with models, and to have all those communities at the workshop talking to each other. I mean, they didn't provide us guidance on, what they hoped would come out in our science themes or how to use those tools. And so, I'm not sure if I can speak to Jack's impressions on what ARCS's priorities are, but at least at the workshop, they wanted us talking to each other, trying to understand how to bridge that gap between models and observations and use them together to understand the system. I don't think I can speak anymore in terms of ARCS's, focus or priorities though. And as someone who does primarily modeling, and that's my primary tool, I'm probably not in the best position to take on that question.
Anyone else? Oh, well, Jack, I'll say I don't think we've completely given up on observing the Arctic, although it does seem to be harder than ever to get site-specific field campaigns off the ground. We are launching a couple of satellites that are very polar oriented shortly, and that's relevant to the system's question, but hardly the end all be all of the answer to that. I'm thinking ISAT-2 and GRACE follow-on.
Right. No, I mean, I think there are agencies and there are programs, even at NSF polar programs, that are still interested in observing. Just that, to me, it seems like ARCS is not really one of them anymore. But that's just an impression, maybe ill-formed.
Yeah.
I think we have a real opportunity with NSF with their 10 big ideas, navigating the new Arctic being one of them. So I think, if we think there's observational needs that are not being met or modeling needs that aren't being met, I think now is a good time to raise our hands and tell NSF, because I think this might be a time when their budgets actually go up I can't believe I said that out loud, for these issues.
Yeah, good point.
This is Merritt. I'll just make a quick comment about the lessons we've learned from the permafrost carbon network, which has just been synthesizing data on permafrost for the past 8 years. And we've learned so much through that, synthesis of observational data. But one of the things we've learned is that there are major gaps in our observations, both spatially and temporally. Most of our observations come from either one specific region in Russia or Alaska. There's a lot of space in between where we literally have very few observations. And we're making really basic discoveries about shoulder seasons, and we have very few observations there. So, I still, while there's great power in data synthesis and upscaling and modeling, I think there's a lot of basic discovery we still have left to uncover.
Yeah. Tying into that, I heard a new term during the presentation that I hadn't heard before, which was dark data. And I was trying to, and there I'm thinking mostly of, and correct me if I'm wrong, historical data sets from the last 50 or 100 years, say, or other paleo data sets that maybe weren't as well archived, that may be relevant to permafrost or other or related elements of the system. And dark data rarely would seem to me to be big data. The types of data that are going to help us understand best understand modern changes in the system as compared to contextualizing the past to better understand the future. Does that make sense? Just trying to distinguish between dark data and big data.
I think, though, dark data, I think there's actually a surprising amount of it that is modern data that is dark data too. I think this happens across like country to country where you have different rules about public access or creating public access to data depending on where funding's coming from. Like I can think just recently of Matthew Morligan's bed machine 3 map, and having people like Fiamma Stroneo, getting in touch with colleagues to say, I know you have this data, is there a way to get this data to this person? And it's not something that, he would have been able to have from a public access kind of data repository. So I agree with you. It's probably not usually big data, but it is, to me, it seems surprising the level in which it happens today with modern data and not just kind of things that people have put together in the past and are now stuck in a, printed journal on a library shelf.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, anyone else? Jack?
No, I'm good right now.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh, you came up. Okay. Anyone else? Any questions for the presenters? Okay, great. Well, I think with that, let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, we're just at time. Okay, well, great. Well, I want to again thank Marika, Jen, and Twyla for presenting. That was really fantastic. And the presentation, that was great. Did you guys put that together for just this meeting?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But
wow.
share it widely.
yeah. That's a keeper for sure in terms of motivating the Arctic system problem. So that'll be archived on the IARPIC website. I presume anyone who's on this call is signed up, but if you're not, I strongly encourage that. It's a great website. And the, we have, I think, Meredith,